I thought tonight was going to be the happiest day of my life, until he turned to my sister instead of me. I remember the way the chandeliers glittered that night as if someone had trapped starlight in crystal and suspended it above us. The entire ballroom shimmered under their glow, casting long golden reflections across the polished marble floors. The air smelled faintly of roses and champagne, sweet and intoxicating, like the kind of perfume meant to remind you of milestones. My pulse throbbed in my throat, quick and uneven, every beat filled with the anticipation of a future I thought was finally within my grasp. I had told myself that tonight would belong to me, that for once in my life I would stand in the spotlight without it being stolen. I believed it with every fiber of my being, until the world I had built in my heart crumbled in a single moment of betrayal. Everything about the evening had felt orchestrated, as though I were walking inside a dream I had secretly written for myself. The venue was breathtaking, one of the most exclusive places in the city, its name whispered by brides-to-be who could only hope to step inside. Velvet drapes framed windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, and tables covered in white linen glowed under the reflection of hundreds of candles. Waiters dressed in crisp black and white moved gracefully across the room with trays of champagne glasses and hors d'oeuvres, weaving seamlessly between conversations and laughter. Ethan looked like something out of a glossy magazine cover, his suit perfectly tailored, his dark hair slicked back, his smile practiced, yet sincere enough to make strangers lean closer when he spoke. He kept brushing his hand against mine as if to reassure me silently, a subtle confirmation that I was the woman he had chosen to spend his life with. But even amid the beauty, the tension within my family lingered like a shadow. It always had. My mother, Linda, had never been able to hide her favoritism. My younger sister, Madison, everyone called her Maddie, was her pride, her darling, the one she could never stop boasting about. Maddie didn't need to earn affection. She simply received it by existing. If Maddie scored a C in school, Linda would say, "She has other talents." If I scored an A, it was, "Well, Claire, that's expected of you." That imbalance carved itself into my childhood and followed me into adulthood. I had taught myself to be strong, to fight for recognition in silence.
That should have belonged to me. I caught her looking at me across the room once. Her smile was too sharp, her eyes too knowing, as though she was in on a secret no one else could hear. A chill rippled down my spine, but I brushed it away. She was my sister, and tonight was supposed to be my night. When the band shifted from lively jazz into something softer, the kind of melody that signaled something intimate was about to unfold, my heart leapt. This was it. I could feel the attention in the room shift, hundreds of eyes turning toward Ethan as he stepped gracefully onto the small stage. The microphone waited for him, gleaming under the spotlight. My friends squeezed my hands, their whispers filled with excitement, their eyes sparkling with tears they hadn't even shed yet. The anticipation swelled so thickly in the air, it felt like we were all holding the same breath. Ethan's voice carried easily, smooth and commanding, as he spoke to the crowd. He spoke about love, about destiny, about how sometimes the right person walks into your life when you least expect it, and everything changes. His words melted through me, each syllable another stitch sewing together the fabric of my hopes. I felt tears rise, unbidden and unstoppable, because I knew what was coming. My moment, my validation, my proof that I was worthy of being chosen. And then he reached into his pocket. My breath caught as the velvet box appeared, and gasps filled the air. Time seemed to slow, every heartbeat thundering in my ears, every nerve in my body on fire. My knees went weak. I raised my trembling hands to my lips, already feeling the sob of joy threatening to break free. Every humiliation I had ever endured, every time Linda had overlooked me for Maddie, every time I had been made to feel invisible, was about to vanish in a single perfect moment. But Ethan didn't walk toward me. At first, I thought I had misread the angle, that maybe he was stepping down on the wrong side of the stage. But he didn't correct himself. His eyes never met mine. His steps carried him deliberately across the ballroom floor, straight toward Maddie, my sister. The air around me collapsed into chaos. Gasps sliced through the crowd, whispers rippled like waves breaking on a shore. And yet, I stood paralyzed, unable to move, unable to comprehend what came. My voice was trapped in my throat, strangled by disbelief. Around me, some guests stared in horror, their hands covering their mouths, while others clapped politely, as if this were nothing more than another love story unfolding in front of them. My vision blurred, but even through the haze, I saw Ethan sink down onto one knee, the velvet box in his hand, his voice steady and Madison, looking up at her with the same eyes that had once looked at me. Will you marry me? The words sliced through me, clean and merciless, and in that instant, in front of everyone who mattered, my world shattered into pieces too sharp to ever fit back together. The man drops to one knee, but not in front of me. My world shattered in slow motion when his eyes locked with hers. I stood there, my breath lodged in my chest, watching the impossible play out in front of me as though I had stepped outside my own body and become nothing more than a spectator at my own tragedy. Ethan, the man who had once sworn he loved me, the man whose hand had traced circles on my skin during late-night conversations about our future, was now kneeling before my younger sister with a diamond ring sparkling under the chandeliers. The room blurred around me, but his face, lifted toward Maddie with adoration in his eyes, remained in horrifying focus. It was the kind of expression I had longed for my entire life, the kind of gaze that validates every sacrifice, every hope, every desperate prayer whispered in the dark. Except it wasn't mine. It belonged to her. The gasp that rose from the crowd hit me like a physical blow. Some guests pressed their hands to their mouths, their eyes darting between me and Ethan as though they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Others leaned forward eagerly, phones already raised to capture the spectacle. The sound of camera shutters and phone notifications filled the air like a cruel soundtrack to my humiliation. Every flash of a camera felt like another nail pinning me to a wall of shame I hadn't earned, but was forced to endure. I could feel the weight of judgment in their stares, their whispers crawling through the room like smoke, suffocating me where I stood. Maddie, ever the actress, played her role with precision. Her hands trembled against her lips, her eyes wide, fairy tale unfolding right before their eyes. They didn't see me unraveling in the shadows of that stage, didn't see how each second etched itself into me like fire branding my soul. When Maddie finally nodded, her voice trembling in false disbelief as she said, "Yes, of course I'll marry you," the room exploded into applause. Glasses clinked, cheers rang out, and strangers clapped as though they had just witnessed the climax of a romantic film. But this wasn't a film. This was my life being torn apart in public, my heart being crushed beneath the heels of the two people I had trusted most. I searched desperately for my mother's face in the crowd, clinging to the hope that at least she would be horrified, that she would rush to me and demand answers. But Linda wasn't horrified. She was radiant, her eyes shimmering with pride as she applauded her younger daughter. She leaned into Maddie, kissing her cheek as though she had been waiting for this very moment all along. It hit me then like a brutal realization. She had known. She had not only known, she had approved. It was a conspiracy wrapped in the language of love, and I had been the pawn, paraded for appearances until the moment they no longer needed me. My silence became a prison. I tried to speak, but no words came. My throat was raw, strangled by the pressure of suppressed rage and grief. I wanted to shout, to tear the illusion apart, to ask Ethan how he could dare stand in front of me after everything we had shared, but my body betrayed me. My arms hung limp at my sides, my legs rooted to the floor, my chest aching with every uneven breath. Everywhere I turned, I saw complicity. My father looked away, unwilling to meet my eyes. Aunts and uncles whispered behind hands, their faces caught somewhere between pity and discomfort. Even some of my friends, people I thought would rise to defend me, seemed paralyzed by the spectacle, too afraid to disrupt the narrative that was being spun so confidently on stage. Their silence was worse than words. It confirmed what I had always feared deep down, that in this family, in this world, Maddie would always be chosen, and I would always be left to watch. The applause lingered in the air like thunder, but inside me there was only a hollow, deafening silence. My cheeks burned, not just with shame, but with the weight of betrayal like chains.
each one a reminder that this humiliation would follow me long after the night ended. I needed air. I needed escape. My vision swam as I stumbled out of the ballroom, the cool night air of the corridor rushing against my burning cheek. My chest heaved, but I still couldn't catch my breath. My legs carried me blindly, desperate to put distance between myself and the sound of celebration still echoing behind me. I wanted to collapse, to dissolve into the floor and disappear so no one could ever look at me with pity again. But then something caught my eye. On a small table near the side entrance of the venue, tucked carelessly beneath a stack of floral arrangements and envelopes, was a folder. It was the kind of thing most people would overlook, just another set of papers forgotten in the chaos of an event. But something about it pulled me closer, even as my vision blurred with tears. The corner of the folder peeked out, the edge of an embossed seal gleaming under the light. I knew that seal. I had seen it when signing contracts, when finalizing documents. It was official. It was important. I reached out with trembling fingers, my curiosity fighting through the fog of humiliation. As I slid the folder free, I caught the bold lettering across the top. Property deed. My heart stuttered. Why would a deed be here, left in plain sight at my engagement party? I clutched it to my chest, my tears momentarily forgotten, replaced by a spark of something else. Confusion. Suspicion. Maybe even the faintest flicker of hope. Because if Ethan and Maddie had stolen everything from me in front of the world, maybe, just maybe, this was the universe handing me a weapon I didn't yet understand. But as I ran out, I noticed something odd about the venue documents sitting on the table. Humiliation burned through me, but a single piece of paper caught my eye. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to press the folder against my chest just to steady myself, as though holding it close might somehow anchor me to the ground. The sting of betrayal still clawed at every corner of my body, raw and unrelenting. But this thin stack of papers drew my focus with an intensity I couldn't explain. It was absurd, really. What business did a property deed have lying forgotten at my engagement party? Abandoned had seemed supportive, but if I was honest, most of the planning had been left to me. He brushed off the responsibility with charming words like, "You're so much better at this, Claire," and "I trust your taste completely." At the time, I took it as flattery. Now, standing in the aftermath of his betrayal, those words twisted bitter in my memory. The venue itself hadn't come easily. It wasn't just a matter of making a phone call and writing a check. There were waiting lists, contracts, endless negotiations. I remembered the long evenings I had spent in this very building's office, bent over paperwork, crunching numbers, trying to stretch my savings to cover the deposit. Ethan had promised to contribute, but his contribution always came late, always smaller than what he swore it would be. So I filled in the gaps, quietly, determinedly, because I wanted this place, not just for the party but for what it represented. This venue was supposed to be my safe haven. My parents' house had never felt like home. It was Maddie's kingdom, her stage, the place where Linda's favoritism reigned without question. But here, in this space filled with chandeliers and polished marble, I had hoped to carve out something of my own. A memory that was mine, untainted by comparison, a milestone that couldn't be overshadowed. I had fought for this place because it symbolized independence, a stage where I could finally be seen. And now, of course, it had become the backdrop to my public destruction. The irony tasted like poison in my mouth. I moved toward a quieter corner of the corridor, away from the muffled echoes of applause that still bled from the ballroom. My chest heaved, and for a moment I just stood there staring at the folder, wondering if opening it would make any difference. What could possibly be inside that could matter in comparison to what had just been stolen from me? Yet some instinct, sharp, insistent, pushed me forward. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled the papers free. The embossed seal confirmed what I had already glimpsed. This was official, legal, binding, property deed. My stomach twisted. Why would Ethan or Maddie or anyone connected to my family have left this here? Why tonight of all nights? My eyes darted across the page, scanning quickly for names, signatures, anything that could explain. But before I could fully take in the details, my vision blurred with tears again. With this deed in my hand, suspicion gnawed at me. Why was this left out in the open?
Why wasn't Ethan guarding it if it mattered to him? Unless it didn't belong to him. The thought chilled me, so absurd that I almost laughed. Could it be possible that this deed, this tangible symbol of ownership, had nothing to do with Ethan at all? That in his eagerness to control everything else, he had overlooked the one thing that might shift the balance back into my hands? I sank into a chair tucked against the wall, my body folding into itself, the folder balanced on my lap. My tears dripped onto the edge of the paper, smudging the ink slightly, but I didn't care. I forced myself to read, line by line, until my eyes landed on the words that made my heart stop. The name on the deed. It wasn't Ethan's. It wasn't Maddie's. It wasn't Linda's. It was mine. Claire Whitman. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The letters seemed to leap off the page, mocking me with their finality, their undeniable truth. My name, etched into legal ink, tethered to the very venue where my life had just been ripped apart. Confusion and shock collided violently inside me. How could this be? Had I signed something I hadn't fully understood during those meetings? Had the payments I scraped together, the endless checks I had written, somehow tipped the balance in my favor? Or had Ethan deliberately left this to me, never expecting that I would discover it tonight of all nights? The questions piled high, each more suffocating than the last, but beneath them all, something else stirred. A spark. A flicker of power I hadn't felt in years. Because as devastating as Ethan's betrayal had been, as humiliating as Maddie's triumph had felt, here in my hands was proof that the stage on which they had mocked me didn't even belong to them. It belonged to me. I ran my fingers over my name again and again, as though touching the letters might make them vanish, as though at any moment the paper would shift and reveal itself to be another cruel trick. But it didn't. It remained solid, unshakable, undeniable. And in that instant, a realization unfurled inside me with terrifying clarity. They thought they had destroyed me tonight, but they had built their betrayal on ground that belonged to me. That ballroom broken. But here, with proof that this venue belonged to me, I felt a spark ignite. It was small, fragile, but it was enough to remind me that not everything had been stolen. They could take my dignity, my reputation, even the love I thought I had. But this space, this ground beneath our feet, bore my name. I thought back to how it had all begun, the endless hours and sacrifices that had led me here. People had always assumed I lived a charmed life because of appearances, but the truth was far grittier. I had worked tirelessly to build something for myself, something no one could strip away. I had put in years of long nights, juggling 2 jobs while finishing school, pinching every dollar until it screamed. I had skipped vacations, said no to luxuries, and taught myself to live on less because I believed that one day the discipline would pay off. And when the opportunity came to invest in this venue, even just in a partial stake, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't glamorous at first. It was terrifying, risky, but I saw potential. I saw beauty. And I saw a chance to tie myself to something permanent. Ethan hadn't understood, or maybe he hadn't wanted to. When I first told him about putting my savings into the venue, he had smiled indulgently, the way a parent humors a child's hobby. "Are you sure, Claire?" he'd said, his voice dripping with doubt. "Wouldn't it make more sense to let me handle investments? That way, we're both protected." I had ignored the subtle condescension in his tone, convincing myself that he just didn't see what I saw. I signed the papers quietly, unwilling to fight for his approval, because deep down, I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me. The irony was unbearable now. The very venue Ethan had used to betray me, to stage his grand, humiliating spectacle, was anchored to my name. He thought he had orchestrated everything, but he had done it on ground I had bought and built. That irony was the only thing keeping me from dissolving completely into despair. It was impossible not to compare my own journey to Maddie's. My sister had never known sacrifice. From the day she was born, she was the sun in our household, and everything orbited around her. Where I was measured by my achievements, Maddie was room. Her triumph Linda proudly celebrated. I pressed my lips together until they hurt, because behind Maddie's glittering smile, I could see Linda's hand guiding everything.
My mother's fingerprints were all over this betrayal. She had always pushed Maddie toward center stage, always reminded me that my worth was negotiable but Maddie's was inherent. It wasn't difficult to imagine the conversations behind closed doors. Linda whispering in Ethan's ear, painting Maddie as the better option, convincing him that aligning with her favored daughter would open doors that Claire never could. Maybe Ethan hadn't needed much convincing. Maybe he had already been looking for a way out, and Maddie had been all too eager to step into my place. The betrayal wasn't spontaneous. It was orchestrated. That realization seared through me with equal parts rage and clarity. This wasn't just Ethan breaking my heart. It was my mother orchestrating my downfall, my sister reveling in it, and a lifetime of favoritism culminating in one grotesque public display. And yet, as furious as I was, as deeply as I ached, I knew I couldn't expose what I had discovered just yet. Not tonight. Not like this. If I stormed back into the ballroom now, waving the deed like a flag, I would look desperate. My voice would be drowned out by the noise of their celebration. They would paint me as hysterical, bitter, incapable of handling my humiliation with grace. And the crowd, hungry for spectacle, would side with the glittering couple over the broken woman. Number. I couldn't give them that satisfaction. I couldn't give them the chance to twist my truth into weakness. I folded the deed carefully and slid it back into its envelope, pressing it close to my chest as though it were armor. I knew what I had to do now. I had to wait. I had to let them bask in their illusion, let them believe they had stripped me of everything, because the higher they climbed on their false pedestal, the further they would fall when I pulled the ground out from under them. The decision settled in my bones like steel. I wouldn't reveal this discovery tonight. I would play the part they expected of me for now, silent, humiliated, broken. But inside, I was no longer broken. Inside, I had fire. Inside, I had proof. They thought they had humiliated me tonight, but endlessly, stabbing at me from every angle until I thought I would drown in the cruelty. And yet, beneath the grief, something darker was taking root. At first it was rage, raw and consuming, the kind that left my chest aching as though a fire had been lit inside me. But as the hours passed, that fire shifted, hardened, transformed. It was no longer just anger, it was resolve. Betrayal had stripped me bare, humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. But it had also revealed something they hadn't counted on. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would crumble. But I had the deed. I had proof. And I had patience. I turned onto my side, clutching the envelope that I had slid beneath my pillow as though it were a shield. Every time my mind wavered, tempted to surrender to despair, I touched the paper and reminded myself, this is mine. The venue, the ground beneath their betrayal, belonged to me. That fact was no longer just comfort, it was strategy. They had chosen to humiliate me in public, so my revenge would have to be public too. And it couldn't be impulsive. It had to be calculated, precise, devastating. The conflict raged within me, pulling me in two directions at once. One side of me wanted to curl into myself and disappear, to escape the weight of pitying eyes and whispered gossip that would surely haunt me for months. That side was broken, raw, wounded beyond repair. But the other side, the one that had clawed its way through years of neglect, that had worked for every scrap of recognition while Maddie was handed everything, refused to yield. That side told me that if I let this betrayal end me, then I would be confirming everything Linda had ever believed, that Maddie was stronger, brighter, more deserving. And I wouldn't let that be my story. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through my curtains, I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't confront them immediately. That was what they would expect, that I would storm into the room, hysterical, desperate to reclaim dignity they had already stolen. Number. My silence would be my strength. I would let them believe they had won. I would let them bask in their illusion of victory.
Anchor me. And there was only one person who fit that role. My best friend, Hannah. Hannah and I had grown up together, though our paths had always been different.
Where my family smothered me with impossible expectations, Hannah's gave her freedom to explore, to dream. She had always been the one I could call at 3 a.m, the one who had sat with me through heartbreaks, exams, career changes, and late-night doubts. She had a way of listening without judgment, of reminding me that my worth wasn't tied to Linda's approval or Maddie's shadow. I called her as the sun began to rise, my voice shaking as I asked if she could come over. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll be there in 15 minutes." And true to her word, she was. When Hannah walked into my apartment, I broke. For a moment, all the resolve I had built through the night crumbled, and I collapsed into her arms. She held me without speaking, her hand stroking my hair the way a mother might comfort a child. For the first time since the night before, I allowed myself to cry openly, sobs tearing through me until I thought I had nothing left. When I finally pulled away, wiping my swollen eyes, she looked at me with a quiet intensity. "Claire," she said softly, "tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about Ethan's betrayal, about Maddie's smug acceptance, about Linda's radiant pride. I told her about the whispers, the humiliation, the way the ground had opened beneath me in front of everyone I knew. And then, my voice trembling, I told her about the deed, about how the venue was mine. Her eyes widened, and then a slow smile spread across her face. Not a smile of mockery, but of recognition. "Do you realize what this means?" she whispered. "They tried to destroy you on your own stage. But Claire, the stage is yours." Her words struck me like lightning, clarifying everything I had been feeling in fragments. She was right. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclamation. About turning the very weapon they had used against me into the instrument of their downfall. Hannah leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "Don't rush. Let them believe they've won. Let them dig their hole, them climb higher and higher on their tower of lies. Let them believe the world was theirs, because when the fall came, it would be mine to orchestrate. I would let their lies build high enough, so the fall would destroy them. They thought they won, but I held the deed. The days that followed felt like watching my life being rewritten in real time, except I wasn't the author anymore. Ethan and Maddie had taken the pen, and they scrawled a version of the story where I was nothing more than a footnote. Within 24 hours of that night, social media was flooded with their carefully staged photos. Maddie's hand, tilted just so, flashed the diamond ring under perfect lighting. Ethan stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his grin wide and victorious. Their captions were sickening. "Found my forever. When love surprises you. She said yes." As though the betrayal had been fate rather than a calculated theft. I didn't need to look for the posts. They found me, whether through friends who sent them with hesitant sympathy, or through the algorithms that knew exactly how to twist the knife. Every time I saw Maddie's smiling face, it felt like the world was mocking me, asking me how I could have been so naive. The likes and comments only deepened the wound. "You two are perfect together. I knew it from the start. So happy for you both." Strangers showered them with blessings, while those who knew me whispered behind closed doors, already painting me as the bitter, discarded ex. It wasn't just online. Linda couldn't contain her pride. She called relatives, old friends, anyone who would listen, retelling the story of the proposal as though it were the greatest love story ever written. She left out the part about me, of course. Or worse, she reframed it. When people asked about me, she would sigh in that performative way she had mastered, lowering her voice as though sharing something tragic. "Claire just wasn't ready for someone like Ethan," she'd say. Or worse, she was too focused on her work. Ethan needed someone who could really support him. Maddie understands him better. Every word was poison. My humiliation became gossip, my pain their entertainment. Invitations to dinners and events arrived in Maddie, the narrative he and Maddie were spinning. Receipts from payments I had made toward the venue, proving how much I had invested long before he ever lifted a finger.
text messages where he had made promises, empty ones now, that revealed the depth of his deceit. Each document, each screenshot, each scrap of proof went into a folder I began to compile. It was slow work, painful work, because each reminder reopened wounds I was still trying to close, but it was necessary. If I was going to destroy the illusion they had built, I needed to do it with facts, not emotion. The more I dug, the more I began to see Ethan for who he really was. The charming smile, the easy confidence, the polished surface, none of it had been real. Or maybe it had been real, but only as a mask. Underneath, he was calculated, always searching for an angle, always chasing the next rung on the ladder of status. I replayed conversations in my head, things I had overlooked before, his obsession with appearances, his insistence on hosting the engagement party at a venue that screamed prestige, his casual comments about people we knew, how he dismissed those with nothing to offer and flattered those with connections. It became clear to me then that Ethan had never been in love with me. He had been in love with what I represented, my stability, my discipline, my ability to create a future without asking for handouts. With me, he had seen a foundation. But Maddie? With Maddie, he saw glamour, easy access, and perhaps most importantly, Linda's unwavering support. Marrying Maddie wasn't just about choosing her. It was about choosing the world my mother would lay at his feet. The realization hurt, but it also sharpened me, because once you understand your enemy's motives, you can dismantle them piece by piece. Ethan's motives weren't love or loyalty. They were money and status. And that meant there had to be cracks, weaknesses he had tried to hide. So I started to look, not just at my memories of him, but at the traces he left behind. The late-night phone calls he had stepped outside to take during our planning meetings. The vague excuses about delayed payments, about needing just a little more time. The way he avoided discussing finances in detail, always changing the subject or distracting me with affection when I pressed too hard. At the time, ventures that had failed spectacularly, leaving behind nothing but debt collectors. He wasn't just ambitious, he was drowning. And marrying Maddie wasn't about love, it was about survival. I stared at the evidence one night, spread across my kitchen table in neat, damning piles. The truth was undeniable. Ethan had targeted me first because he thought I could offer stability. When I had proven too difficult to control, too independent to manipulate, he had shifted to Maddie, lured by the promise of Linda's financial backing and social connections. To him, Maddie wasn't a soulmate, she was a lifeline. The knowledge was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it proved how little I had ever meant to him. Liberating because it gave me power. Ethan's entire facade was built on a foundation of lies, and now I had the blueprints of his downfall in my hands. But one piece of information rose above the rest, so shocking it took my breath away. Buried in the records Hannah and I had gathered was a debt so massive, so dangerous, that it threatened to unravel everything Ethan had built for himself. A debt he had gone to great lengths to hide. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding, the weight of the discovery pressing into me with equal parts dread and exhilaration. Ethan wasn't just a liar. He was desperate. And desperation was something I could use. I uncovered a secret debt he was hiding. His charm was just a mask. Underneath, he was drowning. For so long, I had believed in the version of Ethan that the world saw. Polished, confident, the kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately command attention. He had this way of making people lean in closer, of speaking with just enough charm to convince anyone that he belonged in the world of success and power. But as Hannah and I sifted through document after document, piece after piece of evidence, that mask began to fall away. And what I saw beneath it wasn't a man in control. It was a man frantically bailing water from a sinking ship, praying no one would notice. The debt was staggering. Credit cards maxed out, loans stacked upon loans, investment ventures that had crashed into ashes. He had spread himself too thin, reaching for status symbols, me as his lifeline. My steady job, my savings, my investments,
Everything I had scraped together through years of sacrifice had made me attractive, not as a partner, but as a resource. He had wanted my discipline, my ability to provide a foundation, to cover the cracks in his facade. And I had almost given it to him willingly. I had almost tied myself to a man who saw me not as a woman to love, but as a safety net to exploit. And when I hadn't been enough, when my independence and refusal to yield made me less convenient, he had pivoted to Maddie. Maddie, with her beauty, her easy charm, and more importantly, Linda's endless support. If Ethan couldn't tether himself to my stability, then Maddie offered something even more enticing: access. Linda had connections, a network of people who could open doors Ethan couldn't pry open on his own. And Maddie, oblivious as ever, was too intoxicated by the illusion of being chosen to question his motives. She didn't see the desperation behind his smile. She didn't notice the way he steered conversations toward money, toward opportunities, toward influence. She only saw the fairy tale. But Linda wasn't oblivious. She had always been shrewd, always attuned to the undercurrents others missed. I could see her hand in this, guiding Ethan toward Maddie, dressing up his desperation as destiny. Maybe she thought she was securing Maddie's future by tying her to a man who appeared successful. Or maybe she simply wanted to ensure that her favored daughter had everything, even if it meant stealing from me. Either way, Linda's complicity burned almost more than Ethan's betrayal. Because she was my mother. She was supposed to protect me, not orchestrate my downfall. The more I pieced together, the clearer the picture became. Ethan wasn't building a life with Maddie out of love. He was leveraging her. Marrying her wasn't about partnership, it was about survival. By tying himself to Maddie, he tied himself to Linda's wealth, her reputation, her connections. He thought he had found a shortcut out of his ruin. He thought Maddie would be the inheritance he couldn't earn on his own. And Maddie, oblivious and eager to win, played her role perfectly. She flaunted their engagement like a crown. Parading wasn't just the sister overshadowed by Maddie's endless glow. I was the owner of the venue where they had staged their little victory. And now, I was becoming the keeper of every secret Ethan had tried to bury. I thought about the night of the proposal, the smug certainty in his eyes, the way Linda had clapped like she had orchestrated the entire performance. They believed they had won. They believed they had reduced me to silence, to invisibility, to a life of being dismissed. But what none of them realized was that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Because while they flaunted their engagement on social media, while they basked in the applause of friends and family too blind to see the truth, I was building something stronger. A case. A story. Proof. Every deal Ethan had forged, every lie he had told, every debt he had buried, I was collecting it all. Piece by piece, I was gathering the rope that he would one day hang himself with. And when that day came, it wouldn't just be Ethan who fell. Maddie would see the truth. Linda would face the consequences of her complicity. And everyone who had clapped for their betrayal would watch the ground collapse beneath them. For the first time since the night of my humiliation, I felt steady. My pain hadn't vanished. It was still there, raw and aching, but it no longer controlled me. It had become something sharper, something I could wield. Betrayal had transformed me, and now I was no longer the victim in their story. I was becoming the author of their downfall. But what none of them knew, I wasn't just the venue owner. I had proof of every deal he forged. Knowledge is power, and I was finally armed. Every free moment I had in the weeks that followed became a quiet mission. While Ethan and Maddie basked in the glow of their stolen engagement, smiling for cameras and hosting dinners in their honor, I slipped into the shadows and began building my arsenal. The humiliation they thought had silenced me had instead sharpened me. I moved carefully, deliberately, combing through old emails, contracts, receipts, every scrap of communication I could recover. What they had overlooked in their arrogance was that I
a folder and kept going. Next were the contracts tied to the venue. I had filed them meticulously, partly out of habit and partly because I had always known, deep down, that if things went wrong, I would need proof. Each signature in my name, each payment logged from my account, each amendment signed by the manager, all of it stacked in my favor. The very foundation of Ethan's grand proposal had been built on my sacrifices, and now I had the paperwork to prove it. But what I found next cut deeper than any lie Ethan had told. Buried in a series of text exchanges between Maddie and Ethan, forwarded to me long ago when Ethan had carelessly synced his phone with my laptop, was the truth I hadn't wanted to face. Maddie hadn't been a passive recipient of his betrayal. She had been an active participant. In one message, Maddie wrote, "She's too boring, Ethan. She'll hold you back. With me, you'll actually get somewhere." In another, Ethan responded, "She's stubborn, but I'll find a way out. You're the one I want next to me when it matters." The messages spiraled from there, Maddie mocking me, Ethan agreeing, both of them weaving a narrative where I was the obstacle they needed to overcome to secure their perfect life. Maddie had competed for him, undermining me with her charm, her practiced smiles, her willingness to play dirty. And Ethan, drowning in debt and desperate for a lifeline, had let her. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My hands trembled, my chest constricted, and for a moment the old pain surged back, sharp, raw, suffocating. It was one thing to be betrayed. It was another to realize the betrayal had been orchestrated by the two people who should have cared most about my happiness, my fiancé, my sister. Together, they had laughed at me, plotted against me, built their love story atop the rubble of my trust. The pain was unbearable, but this time I didn't collapse under it. This time, it hardened me. Every cruel word they had written to each other became another reason to fight, another reminder that their victory was built on lies. I printed those messages, tucked them into my growing folder, and felt the balance of power shift a little more in my direction. Hannah was the only one who knew what I was doing. She sat with me at my kitchen table, watching as I sorted through files and papers. Her light, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of evidence that had grown so thick it barely fit in the folder anymore. Contracts, emails, text messages, financial statements, it was all there, undeniable and damning. My chest ached with the weight of the choice before me. I could walk away, let them keep their charade, salvage what little family bond remained. Or I could expose them, burn every bridge, and reclaim my dignity in the most public way possible. The conflict gnawed at me, pulling me in two directions. But then I remembered the night of the proposal, the ring glittering on Maddie's finger, the smug tilt of Linda's smile, the whispers of the guests as they looked at me with pity, as though I had been the fool all along. I remembered the way my knees had nearly given out, the way my voice had failed me, the way I had been silenced by humiliation. And suddenly the conflict dissolved. There was no choice. They had taken everything from me without hesitation. They had mocked me, used me, discarded me, and now they were parading their false happiness in front of the world, convinced they had won. They deserved to be exposed. Not privately, not behind closed doors where they could twist the story, but publicly, in front of everyone who had clapped for their betrayal. I turned to Hannah, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been in weeks. "No," I said. "They don't get to walk away with this. They don't get to rewrite the story. They destroyed me in front of everyone, so that's exactly where I'll destroy them." Her eyes widened, but she didn't argue. She saw the fire in me, the resolve that had replaced the grief. She nodded slowly, as though she understood that I had crossed a line I could never retreat from. I gathered the folder, held it against my chest, and felt its weight settle into me like armor. The pain was still there, sharp and unrelenting, but it was no longer my enemy. It was my fuel. Every sleepless night, every tear, every humiliation, they had all led me here, to this moment of clarity. I was no longer just Claire, the woman left behind. I was the woman with proof, and proof was power. I decided they had to be exposed in front of everyone. If they wanted spectacle,
I would give them the way they were supposed to. I don't want bitterness to define us. Let's celebrate the future together. One last event, at the venue, my treat. The responses came quickly, almost too quickly, their eagerness betraying their arrogance. Maddie replied with a smug flourish, her words dripping with condescension. I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly, Claire. It will be good for everyone to move forward. Ethan's message followed, smooth as ever, his tone polished. That's very mature of you, Claire. It means a lot. We'd be honored. And Linda, of course, wrote last, her words sharp, even in their attempt at kindness. I'm relieved you've come to your senses. This is best for the family. They believed me. They believed I had surrendered, that I was swallowing my pride to stand by their side. They didn't see the trap being laid around them, the walls of truth closing in. The next step was the guest list. If my downfall had been public, then their destruction had to be just as visible. I contacted the venue manager directly, my venue, though they didn't know it yet, and arranged for the invitations to be sent under my authority. I combed through every name, curating carefully. Family members who had whispered about me but cheered for Maddie. Friends who had pitied me silently. Business associates who believed Ethan's charm. Neighbors who had bought into Linda's illusions of a perfect family. I invited them all. But I also added names they wouldn't expect. Colleagues who knew my discipline. Allies who had seen Maddie's manipulations firsthand. People who would recognize evidence when it was placed before them. Witnesses who mattered. Each detail was orchestrated with precision. The decorations mirrored the engagement party, the champagne chilled, the band rehearsed. I wanted everything to feel familiar, almost identical, so that when the truth came crashing down, the contrast would be unforgettable. This wasn't just a party. It was a stage set for revelation. The days leading up to the event were suffocating with tension. I played my part flawlessly, maintaining an air of quiet reconciliation. When Linda called to confirm details, I answered with soft humility, assuring her I wanted nothing more than peace. When Maddie sent photos of her engagement ring for the impossible to overlook, I wanted them to see me, not broken, not forgotten, but unshaken. I wanted every eye in that room to know that I hadn't vanished into silence. As I arrived at the venue, the familiar chandeliers glittered above, casting their golden light as if mocking the memory of my humiliation. Guests filled the room, laughter echoing against the marble floors. From across the ballroom, I saw Maddie glide in, her arm linked with Ethan's, Linda trailing behind them like a queen leading her heirs. Maddie's eyes found mine instantly, and her smile curved smugly, as though she had already won. Ethan followed her gaze, his expression careful, practiced, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of unease quickly buried beneath charm. Linda, of course, didn't look at me at all. She beamed at the guests, shaking hands, performing the role of the proud matriarch. I moved through the crowd with calculated grace, greeting people warmly, thanking them for coming, keeping my composure steady. Beneath the surface, my pulse raced, but I didn't let it show. This was theater, and I was the lead actress now. The speeches began as I had arranged. Linda took the microphone first, her words dripping with pride as she spoke about Maddie and Ethan, about true love finding its way. Maddie followed, her voice falsely modest, thanking everyone for supporting her and Ethan, her hand flashing the diamond ring at every opportunity. Ethan spoke last, his tone smooth, his words crafted to charm, though I noticed how his gaze darted occasionally toward me, as though he sensed something lurking beneath my calm exterior. As the applause faded, the band prepared to play again, the waiters moved to refill glasses, and the night threatened to drift back into ordinary celebration. But that was when I stepped forward. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the marble, each step deliberate, echoing like a drumbeat of inevitability. Conversations hushed as people turned to watch me, curiosity rippling through the crowd. Maddie's smile faltered, just slightly, confusion flickering across her face. Ethan stiffened, his jaw tightening. Linda's eyes narrowed, suspicion dawning.
I reached the microphone and curled my fingers around it, feeling it.
Voice of the humiliated woman they thought I was, but the voice of someone who had found her power. Most of you were here the last time we gathered in this room, I began, my eyes sweeping across the crowd. Faces froze, smiles faltered, conversations stilled. Maddie's gaze narrowed, suspicion flashing across her face. Ethan's jaw clenched. Linda shifted uncomfortably, as if already sensing the script was no longer hers to control. You remember the spectacle, the lights, the applause, the celebration. But what you don't know, I continued, my voice cutting through the stillness, is the truth behind that performance. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some leaned forward, curious, others stiffened, uneasy. I gripped the microphone tighter, my resolve anchoring me. I was supposed to be Ethan's fiancée, I said, my voice sharp now. Gasps echoed, though everyone already knew. It was the part of the story no one dared to say aloud. We planned this life together. We built this night together. I was the one who arranged the venue, who paid the deposits, who worked tirelessly to make it happen. But instead of proposing to me, in front of my family, my friends, all of you, Ethan turned to Maddie. My voice didn't break. It sliced. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Some looked at Maddie, others at Ethan, and whispers rose like a wave crashing. Maddie's smile faltered, her lips parting in feigned innocence. Ethan stood rigid, his expression carefully composed, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. But that betrayal, I continued, raising my voice just enough to silence the whispers, wasn't just about love. It was about lies. Lies that began long before that night I pulled a folded paper from my folder and held it high. Ethan has been drowning in debt. Credit cards, failed investments, loans stacked on loans. Everything he showed you, his suits, his charm, his image of success, it was all an illusion. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, heads turning. A few people even pressed their hands to their mouths in shock. Ethan stepped forward, his face pale, his hand outstretched as though to stop.
Lifted her chin in defiance. You didn't just stumble into this. You didn't fall in love innocently. You were part of it. You encouraged him. You mocked me. You knew what he was doing and you helped him do it. The gasps this time were sharper, more directed. Eyes turned toward Maddie, whose expression faltered under the scrutiny. That's not true, she snapped, her voice too shrill, too defensive. You're just jealous, Claire. You couldn't keep him, and now you're trying to destroy us. I lifted another paper, a printed text message exchange. Really? Because this says otherwise. Here are your words, Maddie. She's too boring, Ethan. She'll hold you back. With me, you'll actually get somewhere. And here's Ethan's response. She's stubborn, but I'll find a way out. You're the one I want next to me when it matters. The room erupted again, louder this time, disbelief and outrage colliding in a cacophony of whispers. People leaned over to read the papers I handed to those closest, the evidence undeniable. Maddie's face drained of color, her lips trembling, though she tried to speak. Ethan glared at me, his composure unraveling, his fists clenched at his sides. Linda sat frozen, her smile finally gone, her eyes darting between her daughters with something like horror flickering in her gaze. I straightened my shoulders, my voice cutting through the chaos. This wasn't love. This wasn't destiny. It was betrayal, calculated and deliberate. Ethan targeted me because of my stability, my savings, my discipline. And when I wouldn't bend, when I wouldn't be used, he turned to Maddie. Not because he loved her, but because of Linda. Because he knew tying himself to Maddie meant tying himself to her approval, her money, her influence. Gasps turned into outraged murmurs. Some shook their heads, others whispered furiously to one another. The perfect facade Ethan and Maddie had paraded before the world was crumbling, piece by piece, in front of everyone they had sought to impress. Ethan finally snapped. "This is slander," he hissed, stepping forward. His voice shook, the charm gone, replaced with raw panic. "You're twisting things, Claire."
Face twisted with rage, Linda sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. The perfect image they had constructed was cracking, breaking under the weight of the truth. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I let the silence stretch for a moment, then took a slow breath. "And yet, all of this," I said, my voice lower now, sharper, "isn't even the biggest secret." The crowd stilled, waiting, leaning closer. Anticipation rippled through them, their shock giving way to hunger for whatever revelation was coming next. Ethan froze, his panic sharpening into fear. Maddie's lips parted, confusion breaking across her face. Linda's eyes narrowed, as though she sensed what was coming but couldn't quite believe it. I looked out at the sea of faces, my grip tightening on the microphone. "You think you know the whole story, but you don't. Because what none of them ever expected me to reveal is the truth about this very venue." Gasps rose again, sharp and questioning. I held their gaze, my voice steady, my resolve unshakable. But I hadn't revealed the biggest secret yet: ownership of the venue. The ground they stood on didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. The silence in the room was unbearable, a suffocating pause that seemed to stretch across centuries. All eyes were on me, waiting, holding their breath, wondering what revelation I had yet to deliver. I felt the microphone heavy in my hand, the weight of truth pressing against my chest. For weeks I had carried it alone, hidden it like a secret weapon. Now, at last, it was time to release it. I drew the folder from my side, the same folder I had clutched on the night of my humiliation. The crowd leaned closer, their whispers barely restrained. Ethan's eyes widened as he recognized it, his jaw tightening as though he already knew the devastation about to unfold. Maddie blinked rapidly, confusion etched across her perfect face. Linda sat rigid, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "This," I said, my voice strong, "is the deed to this venue. The place where you all gathered to watch my humiliation. The place where Ethan and Maddie paraded their betrayal. The place my own mother celebrated their cruelty. And do you know whose name is written here? Not Ethan's, not Maddie's, not Linda's." I opened the folder with deliberate slowness, letting the suspense ripple through the room like electricity, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "No," he muttered, shaking his head, his voice barely audible over the storm of reactions. "That's not possible." Maddie's expression was worse. Her smug confidence collapsed in an instant, replaced with horror, her mouth opening and closing as though words might save her. But no words came. She stood frozen, the diamond ring on her finger suddenly meaningless, her triumph crumbling before her eyes. And Linda? Linda didn't speak. She sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the deed, as though it had personally betrayed her. For years she had controlled the narrative, chosen the golden child, orchestrated the downfall of her other daughter. But now, confronted with undeniable proof, she had nothing. Her silence was deafening. Her refusal to defend Maddie was louder than any applause she had once given her. The guests erupted again, voices overlapping in disbelief. "She owns it? How could that be? All this time?" Their words buzzed around me, but I kept my gaze steady on Ethan and Maddie. "You see?" I said, my voice resonating with a calm I hadn't known I possessed. While Ethan was busy spending money he didn't have, while Maddie was busy mocking me and plotting behind my back, I was building something real. I worked, I saved, I invested, and in the end, I created something permanent. This place. My place. I let the words hang, let the truth sink in. So when you humiliated me here, when you turned my engagement into Maddie's celebration, you weren't standing in triumph. You were standing in my home, my ground, my property. Every toast you made, every smile you flaunted, every lie you told, it all happened under my roof. The shock hit the room like thunder. Maddie gasped audibly, her pride unraveling as the realization sank in. She had paraded her stolen victory in a place that belonged to me. Her crown shattered, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the golden child. She was exposed. Ethan looked trapped, cornered, like an animal realizing the cage around him was closing. His eyes darted toward the crowd, desperate to find support, but all he saw was judgment. The admiration he had relied on was gone, replaced with suspicion and disgust. His carefully crafted image.
Strain, you don't understand, he said, stepping forward, his desperation seeping through every word.
Claire, you can't just do this. You're twisting everything, making me look like... Like what? I cut in sharply, my voice slicing through his excuses. Like the liar you are? Like the manipulator who used me for my stability, then used my sister for her connections? Like the fraud who staged his triumph inside a venue he didn't even own? The crowd gasped again, their shock turning into murmurs of agreement. Ethan's protests faltered, his words crumbling under the weight of evidence. Maddie looked at him now with wide, panicked eyes, as though realizing for the first time that he hadn't chosen her out of love, but out of convenience. Linda shifted uncomfortably, but still she said nothing. Her silence echoed louder than words. I straightened my shoulders, the deed still in my hand, the microphone amplifying every word. This is my truth. This venue is mine, and so is the power to expose what you've done. You thought you destroyed me, but all you did was reveal who you really are, and tonight everyone else sees it too. The room was thick with shock, the weight of my revelation pressing down on every corner. Ethan's face twisted with fury. Maddie's pride lay in ruins. Linda sat in silent defeat, and the guests buzzed with disbelief. I had turned their spectacle into mine, their triumph into their downfall. But even as I stood there, triumphant, I saw it in Ethan's eyes, a flicker of something dangerous. Desperation. Panic. A man with nothing left to lose. And I knew then that this wasn't over. But he still had one card left to play. Cornered animals always lash out. Ethan's face twisted the moment I revealed the deed. His mask of charm was gone, shattered into something raw and dangerous. The crowd's shock pressed in on him from every side, their murmurs sharp as knives, their eyes burning holes into his carefully crafted facade. He was cornered, stripped bare, and I could see it in the tight clench of his jaw, the wild flicker in his eyes. He wasn't going to go down quietly. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice cracking through the ballroom like a whip. The crowd recoiled and
Debts? That I faked your signatures on loan applications? That I hacked your phone to send text between you and Maddie? Maddie flinched, her face paling as the crowd's eyes snapped to her. "That's not true," she stammered, her voice high-pitched and defensive. "I didn't plot anything. I didn't..." She glanced at Ethan, her words faltering. "I didn't know about any of this." But her protest fell flat. The evidence was still in my hand, and the whispers in the room had turned sharp, skeptical. Her denial only made her look guiltier. Linda, ever the strategist, finally rose from her seat. She held up her hands, her voice sharp but rehearsed, the tone of a woman who had quelled family scandals before. "Enough," she snapped, her eyes darting between us. "This is getting out of control. We don't air dirty laundry in public. Claire, if you had grievances, you should have come to me privately. You're humiliating the family." Her attempt at control might have worked once, but not tonight, not anymore. I turned toward her, my voice low but cutting. "Humiliation," I said. "Do you mean the humiliation I endured when my fiancé proposed to my sister in front of everyone? In this very room? That wasn't humiliation, according to you. It was a celebration. But now that the truth makes Maddie and Ethan look like the frauds they are, suddenly it's too shameful to be public?" A wave of agreement rippled through the guests, their murmurs rising in support. Linda's lips tightened, her control slipping, the authority she wielded for years crumbling under the weight of undeniable truth. Ethan lunged forward, his voice booming. "You think you can just throw around accusations and papers and ruin people's lives? You think anyone here cares about some contract? About some receipts? You're bitter, Claire. That's all you are. Bitter and jealous. That's why I left you. That's why Maddie is the one standing by my side now." But the desperation in his voice betrayed him. His words no longer landed as truth. They reeked of panic. I held up the folder, my voice cutting through his tirade like steel. You didn't leave me for Maddie. You left me for survival. Because you're drowning in debt, Ethan. Because you thought you could use me. No, she whispered weakly. I didn't know it was this bad. The crowd erupted, voices clashing in disbelief, outrage, pity. Linda slammed her hand on the table, her voice rising above the chaos. Enough! This family will not be torn apart by petty revenge. I turned on her, my words sharp as a blade. This family was torn apart the moment you chose Maddie over me, the moment you let Ethan humiliate me and called it love. Don't you dare stand here now and pretend this is my doing. The only petty thing here is the web of lies you all spun, and tonight it's unraveling. The room shook with the weight of it all, the tension so thick it was almost unbearable. Ethan stood rigid, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with fury. Maddie's pride lay in ruins, her defenses crumbling. Linda, for the first time, looked powerless, her silence finally betraying her favored daughter. I stepped closer to Ethan, holding his gaze. You wanted to turn me into the villain. You wanted to make me the bitter ex, the jealous sister. But I don't need to convince anyone. I have proof. I lifted the papers high, letting the crowd see. And proof doesn't lie. Ethan's face twisted, his mask finally gone, replaced with raw fury. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash another desperate defense. But before he could speak, the ballroom doors swung open. The sound echoed like a gunshot, silencing the chaos instantly. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence commanding. The crowd fell into stunned silence, their whispers vanishing into the thick air. Ethan froze, his face draining of color, his bravado collapsing in an instant. One officer lifted a folder in his hand. We've received new evidence regarding fraudulent activity and outstanding debts connected to Ethan Collins. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to shake the chandeliers above. Ethan staggered back, his mouth opening but no words escaping. Maddie stared at him in horror. Linda's face crumpled, her control shattered, and I stood there, steady, watching the truth I had carried for so long finally take its shape in the hands of the law. And then the police walked in with the final evidence. The truth doesn't just hurt, it destroys. The room was frozen, suspended in a silence so sharp that were never disclosed. Legal action is being pursued. The words struck the room like thunder. Gasps erupted, sharp and disbelieving, as people twisted in their seats to look at Ethan. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others shook their heads as though unable to reconcile the man they had admired with the truth now laid bare. Ethan staggered back, his face pale, his charm dissolved into nothing but panic. "No," he said hoarsely, his voice cracking. This isn't what it looks like." He reached out as though to grab the folder, but the officer stepped back, unimpressed. "These aren't lies," the officer continued. "These are official records." The weight of those words crushed the last remnants of Ethan's facade. His polished image, his rehearsed confidence, all of it collapsed under the undeniable proof. His shoulders sagged, his eyes darting desperately across the crowd, searching for someone, anyone, to believe him. But all he found were stares filled with disappointment, disgust, betrayal. The audience that once clapped for his triumph was now witnessing his ruin. Maddie's face crumpled. She had stood tall for so long, her smugness her armor, but in that moment the truth was too heavy to bear. Her body shook as though the air itself was betraying her, and then she broke. "I didn't know it was this bad!" she cried, her voice shrill, her hands trembling as she clutched the table for support. Tears streaked her cheeks, but they weren't tears of innocence. They were tears of exposure. "He told me it wasn't like this. He told me he loved me. I thought... But her words faltered, swallowed by sobs. The crowd stared, unmoved, because everyone could see what she really meant. She hadn't cared about love. She had cared about winning, about taking something from me, about basking in Linda's approval. And now the cost of her greed was laid bare for everyone to see. Her voice broke again. She gasped, the words choking her. "I only wanted what she had. I couldn't stand being second. I couldn't stand her being ahead of me. So I... Her confession spilled out in fragments, jagged and broken,
But the meaning was clear. Jealousy, envy, betrayal. The truth behind every smug smile and every mocking word. The guests recoiled, her complicity pressing down too heavily for excuses. Her pride had always been her weapon, but now it betrayed her, leaving her powerless. I stood there, my breath steady, watching the unraveling I had waited for. Ethan cornered, stripped of his lies. Maddie collapsed, exposed by her own jealousy. Linda silent, her power shattered. And all of it happening in front of the very people who had once applauded their performance. The spectacle they had built had become their stage of destruction. I lifted the microphone again, my voice steady. "This," I said, sweeping my gaze across the crowd, "is the truth. The truth they tried to bury beneath lies, beneath betrayal, beneath humiliation. But the truth doesn't stay buried. It rises. And tonight, it has destroyed every illusion they tried to build." The crowd erupted, not in applause, not in celebration, but in gasps, in murmurs, in a swell of voices grappling with what they had just witnessed. The room was alive with disbelief and outrage, with the weight of betrayal pressing into every guest. Ethan sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands, his once perfect suit now looking like a costume stripped of meaning. Maddie sobbed openly, her tears staining her dress, her pride shattered beyond repair. Linda sat stiff and silent, her eyes glassy, her face etched with defeat. For the first time in years, I felt taller than them all. Not because I had humiliated them, but because I had reclaimed myself. I had faced the lies, endured the betrayal, carried the humiliation, and I had risen above it. Justice had arrived, undeniable and final, carried not just by my words, but by official records, by the presence of the law itself. But as I looked around the room, at the faces of those who had once whispered about me, at the ruin of the family who had betrayed me, I realized something unsettling. Justice wasn't enough. The truth had been revealed, their lies destroyed, their reputations shattered. But inside me there was still a hollow ache, still questions that burned, wounds that hadn't healed. Justice had exposed them, but justice couldn't erase the years of neglect, the weight of favoritism, the scars of betrayal. Justice couldn't give me back the nights I had spent below space, not for humiliation, for a decision. I could end the evening on the cold edge of justice, let the paperwork and the uniforms speak for me, step back and let the spectacle dissolve into whispers that would scatter like ash by morning. Or I could do the one thing that had been denied to me since the day I first learned to measure myself against my sister's shadow. I could speak. I could claim what was mine to claim. Not the venue, not the proof, not the victory, but the meaning of it all. I lifted the microphone, felt the rough warmth of its mesh against my palm, and let my gaze sweep the faces I knew so well, the ones that had flinched with pity, hardened with judgment, softened with surprise. My voice, when it came, did not hesitate. Thank you for staying, and it sounded almost like a benediction. Thank you for being here while the truth found its way to the surface. Tonight wasn't the evening I wanted when this place was booked. It wasn't the evening many of you expected when you walked beneath these chandeliers. But it is the evening we all deserved, because truth is the only thing strong enough to hold up the weight of what we build on it. I paused, not for drama but for breath, for the simple human need to gather myself. The faces before me, neighbors, old family friends, clients who had become confidants, former teachers who remembered my name only when it was attached to a good grade, tilted toward me with an attention I had begged for and no longer feared. When I was a kid, I continued, I learned early that love could be rationed like a privilege, that if you achieved enough, kept quiet enough, made yourself useful enough, maybe, just maybe, you could earn the right to belong. I chased that bargain longer than I should have. I chased it through school and jobs and late nights and unreturned phone calls. And eventually I chased it into a relationship that promised safety while quietly cashing every check my trust would write. I let the words fall without bitterness. The room knew the facts now. What mattered was the shape of the meaning.
When the proposal I thought was meant for me bent toward someone else, it felt like the world was confirmed and pride. And the minute our eyes met, I understood that courage is sometimes nothing more glamorous than a friend who will sit at your kitchen table while you print receipts at midnight. I lost a great deal in the past weeks, I said. I lost the illusion that love can be negotiated. I lost the belief that silence is the same thing as grace. I lost whatever remained of a habit I had of shrinking so other people could feel larger. But I did not lose myself. You can watch someone try to strip you of your story in front of a crowd and still walk out with your name intact. You can be dragged into a theater of betrayal and still decide the final act belongs to you. The words steadied as I spoke them, each sentence laying a plank across the chasm between the girl I had been and the woman who stood at the microphone now. This isn't about revenge. Revenge is loud and brief. What I'm after is quieter and longer lived. I want my life back. I want to set it on ground that doesn't shake when someone else wants a bigger slice. There were nods now. Not the polite bobbing of heads people perform to signal agreement they don't feel, but the slow, instinctive nods of recognition. A few guests wiped their eyes without embarrassment. One of my former coworkers, a woman who had watched me take on extra shifts while smiling through exhaustion, raised her glass in a way that said, "I see you," not as a performance, but as a witness. I kept going, not because I feared the moment would slip from me, but because I had more to give it than a single clean line. To those of you who reached out quietly this month, I said, the ones who asked if I needed anything when the kindest thing to offer was an unhurried ear. You gave me a place to put the weight when I couldn't carry it alone. To the venue staff who treated me with respect when others called me dramatic for asking simple questions. You reminded me that professionalism is a kind of dignity all its own. To the manager who walked me through the deed when my hands shook so badly I could barely hold a pen. You protected not just my investment, but my confidence in the fact that I had done something difficult, and done it well. To the officers who waited until the facts were gathered instead of reaching for spectacle before substance, you modeled accountability, tenderness as if it belonged to all of us. I won't rewrite what happened here, I said, and the room quieted around my promise. Betrayal happened. Lies happened. A mother's silence made room for them, and a sister's envy fed them. And a man's desperation dressed them up in expensive suits and called them love. That is all true. But another thing is true. I am not what was done to me. I am not the rumor people try to recognize in the grocery aisle, or the cautionary tale traded in whispers at brunch. I am the person who built a place worth standing in, and then stood in it while the truth shook the dust from the rafters. That is mine. A scatter of applause rose and then steadied into something fuller, not jubilant. The evening had not earned jubilation, but sincere. The sound thread through the crystal light like a promise. I waited for it to subside because there was one more piece of the evening that belonged to me to name. I shifted the microphone in my hand and, for the first time since the officers had entered, allowed my gaze to slide toward the far side of the room, where Maddie and Ethan stood in the brittle posture of people who haven't yet learned how to stand without performance. Their faces, once a study in entitlement and calculation, now carried the waxy look of people lit from the inside by embarrassment they can't outrun. I have nothing to say to either of you that the evidence hasn't said better, I told them. Not cruelly, simply. There's no speech that restores what you took. And there's no apology that will rebuild a childhood spent learning how to make myself smaller. If you're looking for absolution, you've come to the wrong woman. If you're looking for permission to leave, you don't need mine. I let the sentence settle, not to humiliate them, but to mark a boundary I should have set long ago. Go! The word was not a shout. It did not need to be. It was just a door opening to the corridor they had earned. Maddie blinked like someone waking under harsh light. Then she glanced at Linda with the old reflex for instructions that had guided her since she could first point to what she wanted and expect it to appear. Linda's mouth tightened.
But she did not move to gather her daughter, or argue with the room, or the glass. The crowd shifted to make a path. No one reached out to stop them. No one reached out to comfort them either. The noises that followed, a chair scraped back, a glass set down too hard, a heel catching the seam where marble meets carpet, were the small, ordinary sounds of a room learning to breathe differently. When the doors closed behind them and their absence finally settled, a quiet flowed back into the space. Not the brittle hush of dread or the wary stillness of gossip, but a quiet that felt like clean air after a storm. I turned again to the people who had remained and realized that, for the first time all night, I was not bracing myself for what they might say. I was ready to hear it. I was ready to be heard. I won't pretend I know how to fix what's broken between the people who share my last name, I said. And if my voice wavered for a moment, it did so only because telling the truth about grief is hard. I won't pretend the child in me doesn't still reach for a mother who never learned how to give the kind of love I needed. But I can promise you this. I won't spend another year, another week, another day bargaining with my worth. I won't build a life around other people's appetites. I won't ask permission to stand in rooms I built. I felt the steadiness return as I spoke the promises aloud, binding myself to them in front of witnesses who would remember. If reconciliation is ever possible, it will be because the truth stayed where I put it tonight. It will be because accountability learned how to sit at the same table as affection. Another wave of applause moved through the room, warmer now, unafraid to be heard. The band, without instruction, held their instruments quietly at their sides as though understanding that music would be too quick a gloss on a night that needed to end with words. A server paused near the corner and closed his eyes for a beat before resuming his work with a pace that honored the gravity of the moment. Small things, ordinary, human. And it struck me that a life rebuilt is less a temple raised in a day than 1,000 small tasks done with care. I thanked the guests once more, not with a flourish, but with a simple bow of my head. I thanked the staff by name, because a person's name placed carefully in the air is a kind of gratitude that lingers. I thanked the manager for walking the line between discretion and courage. I thanked was simply proof that sound can lift without wounding. I closed my eyes for a moment and felt the vibration of it in the bones of the building and in the bones of my own chest, where a bruised heart had learned how to beat for something other than survival. I stepped back from the microphone, not with reluctance, but with a calm that told me the words I'd needed to say had been said. I looked again at the faces, and this time I did search for Linda, not to pull her into the center of a scene she could not hold, but to recognize the complicated truth of what remained. She sat very straight, hands folded, eyes wet and furious with a mix of shame and grief and something that might, over a long enough road, soften into humility. We did not speak, we did not nod, we did not arrange even a truce of expressions. There would be other days for that kind of labor if they ever arrived. Tonight had earned its own ending. I handed the microphone to the manager and felt the imprint of the mesh on my palm, like the fading signature of a contract signed at last with myself. People began to stand, not to swarm the stage, not to corner me with condolences rubbed smooth by overuse, but to approach with the unrushed courtesy Americans reserve for moments when they remember their better instincts. Some offered simple handshakes, some offered brief words, some offered nothing more than a look that said, "We saw, we will remember." Hannah reached me last because she always does. She knows I hate to be crowded when adrenaline loosens its hold. She pressed her forehead to mine for a second, a childhood gesture we'd never quite outgrown, and whispered, "You did it." "No," I said, feeling the smallest curve of a smile climb one corner of my mouth. "I started it." She understood. The best friends always do. I stood in the center of my own floor, the after sound of applause still humming the way water does in a glass after you've set it down. And I realized that justice had been the door, not the destination. It had opened. I had walked through. What stretched beyond it wasn't a landscape of victory banners, but a quieter ground. Mornings where I would choose the shape of my day, evenings where I would close my own door without counting who approved, a ledger where forgiveness and boundaries could be entered in the same ink. But as the applause faded, I realized this was more than my story. It was my rebirth. That night, I lost 2 people, but I found myself, collapsed. Now, it was the spot where I had reclaimed everything they thought they had stolen. The ache of loss was still there.
You don't shed betrayal like a coat at the door. It clings, it bruises, it reshapes you. I had lost Ethan, though truthfully, I had never really had him. I had lost Maddie, though in many ways I had lost her long before, each smile and compliment another mask over envy. And I had lost whatever fragile thread of family had bound us together under Linda's command. That night, all of it snapped. The pieces scattered across the ballroom floor, and for the first time I didn't rush to gather them. But in that loss, something else emerged. Something heavier, yes, but stronger. A spine I had forgotten I carried. A voice I had been taught to lower. A claim I had been told not to make. That night, standing in the same room where my dignity had been stripped away, I realized that the only thing worse than losing people who betrayed you is losing yourself to the betrayal. And I hadn't. I had found myself instead. The venue seemed to hum with that realization. Every polished surface reflected not just the glow of chandeliers, but the fragments of my journey. The contract with my name. The papers that held proof of my worth. The microphone that carried words I once thought I'd never have the courage to say. This place wasn't just brick and mortar anymore. It was a monument to survival, to independence, to the truth that even when betrayal tries to define you, you can carve a different definition into stone. I walked slowly, tracing the edges of the room with my fingertips against the walls. They had seen it all. Ethan's performance, Maddie's smug smile, Linda's applause, the crowd's whispers, my silence, my tears, my fury, my proof, my strength. And now they saw me steady. They saw me whole. This building was no longer just a venue I owned. It was a symbol of the night I learned that power doesn't come from someone else choosing you. It comes from choosing yourself. Pain is strange that way. It doesn't vanish when you conquer it. It lingers, reshaped into memory, into lessons, into a sharp edge you can carry like armor. My pain had stripped me down to nothing. It had humiliated me, shattered me, forced me to confront every insecurity I had carried since childhood. Woman was me. I took a slow breath and let the quiet of the room settle into me. For years I had believed that love was something earned, by being useful, by being quiet, by being patient. For years I had believed that family loyalty meant swallowing pain and wearing smiles. For years I had believed that stability came from attaching myself to someone else's name. That night shattered those beliefs. And in the wreckage, I built something better. Strength, resilience, independence. A voice that didn't tremble when it spoke truth. As the night stretched into morning, I sat at one of the tables, the velvet cloth smooth beneath my fingers. My chest ached, but it was a clean ache now, the kind that comes after a wound has been stitched. I thought about the girl who had walked into this venue weeks ago, full of nerves and hope, ready to say yes to a life built on lies. And I thought about the woman who now sat here, no longer waiting to be chosen, no longer begging for approval, no longer shrinking to make space for others. That night, I didn't just lose Ethan. I didn't just lose Maddie. I didn't just lose Linda's version of love. I lost the parts of myself that thought I needed them. And in losing those, I found everything. The venue became my symbol, my sanctuary. Every time I walked through its doors afterward, I felt the echo of that night. Not the pain, but the transformation. The walls whispered not of betrayal, but of rebirth. And I realized something profound. Betrayal doesn't just break you. It gives you the chance to rebuild. And when you rebuild, you are stronger than you ever were before. I rose from the table and walked once more to the center of the floor. The chandeliers flickered softly, casting light across the polished marble. I looked up, and for the first time, I didn't see the ghost of Ethan's betrayal or Maddie's triumph. I saw my own reflection, steady and unflinching. I had been humiliated here. I had been broken here. But I had also been remade here. This venue wasn't just a building anymore. It was me. It was proof that even when betrayal strips everything away, you are not defined by what you lose. You are defined by what you choose to become after. And so I ask you, the listener, the witness, the one who has followed me through every